Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my most requested video, at least the video I think has been requested the most on the channel, which is talking about where would I recommend you start reading the Star Wars Expanded Universe. A lot of people ask me about where to start the Expanded Universe, and I usually just give like one or two answers, but today I'm going to give my 6 answers for where to start the Star Wars Expanded Universe. I'll tell you which book or series to start with, and then I'll tell you why you would want to start with that, and then from here you should be able to find a good entry point. You could start with any of these. You could start with all of these. You could choose one, not like it, and still choose another because they're a little bit different. So there's plenty of opportunity here. And of course, I'm just talking about the expanded universe, which is the stuff that came out before the switch over to canon in 2014. So I'm talking about the first 150 adult books. I'm not going to really get into comics because I'm not a big comics reader. I've read some of the middle grade, but not a ton of it. So I'm really just sticking to adult books here in my recommendations. So I have 6 books or series. I have basically 2 series in the post-Return of the Jedi universe. I have 1 in the Old Republic, and then I have 3 standalones that I think would be good starting places. So let's go ahead and get in. Some of these are going to be super obvious, so if you're a really well-seasoned reader of the Expanded Universe, these might seem, boring to you. However, let me know what you would recommend as your starting places if you could recommend one, and if you have read a lot of Star Wars books, let me know what your first one was. That's always interesting to read about. But let's start out with my first recommendation, which is the most obvious and classic, Heir to the Empire. This is the first Star Wars book released by Bantam Books in 1991. It kickstarted the expanded universe as we know it. There technically had been a few books from Del Rey Books back in the 80s, but this was the one that really started the EU as we know it. Timothy Zahn is a terrific writer, and this is the first book in the Thrawn trilogy. And so this is an excellent starting place, not just because it's one of the first books written for Star Wars, but because this is where the plot threads started to develop for the greater expanded universe, particularly the post-Return of the Jedi universe. There are some books that interconnect before Return of the Jedi for Star Wars, but if you are talking about the serious interconnections that happen, that's post-Return of the Jedi. And there's a lot of it. So I understand that, navigating that can be hard. This is probably the best and easiest starting point. This is one of those books that just feels like the movies. The villains are excellent. The heroes feel very true to themselves. It's set about 5 years after Return of the Jedi. And so you could read just this book and then move on to others, or you could just read the whole trilogy, which I would actually recommend to read this trilogy first and then read other books. This was not technically my first expanded universe novel to read, but it was one of my first, and it was a delightful experience. I had such a blast reading this. So that's the first one I'll recommend. The second one I'll recommend is also a post-Return of the Jedi book series, and this one also was from the Bantam era, and that is the X-Wing Rogue Squadron books, the X-Wing books. X-Wing, they developed 10 books over time, but the basic way it worked was Michael Stackpole wrote the first 4, and they form a complete arc, and I would recommend that as a potential starting place. These have little references and connections to a few other things, but generally this series kind of starts out some of the characters. The character of Corran Horn is introduced here. You get Mirax. You get Tycho Celchu, a few other characters that are pretty big in the expanded universe. And this book also is just, if you love dogfights in Star Wars and you like, the space battle action stuff, there's some space battle stuff here. And it's just a cool group of characters who are part of the Rogue Squadron that you follow here. There's also a second set of books, Wraith Squadron, which are excellent books. And then, of course, the authors kind of alternated towards the end. But I would still say that the first 4 are like the solid, this is the entry point for them. You can get to the others eventually, they're great, but the first 4 is what I'd recommend here. All right, the last series I'll recommend is not a post-Return of the Jedi series, it's actually an Old Republic series. And if you follow my channel, you might be like, but Jonathan, you didn't like this series as much. But I'll explain why I'm recommending it, and that's the Darth Bane trilogy, which starts out with the first book, Path of Destruction. So Darth Bane is one of those book series that has this incredible place of reverence in the fandom. And that's because it just gets how to write the dark side, it gets that Old Republic feeling, and it did something never before seen in Star Wars. If you were like, I want to try out some Old Republic storytelling for Star Wars, you may have heard about the video games, you may have played some of the games, you may have read some of the lore or something, you're like, I want to read some Old Republic books. This is the standard bearer trilogy of the Old Republic era. This trilogy is fairly standalone, but of course it has connections to other things. And I think that you'll get a feel for how the dark side can be written. And, you know, I'm not a big dark side fan, so it's not the trilogy for me. But I respect it, and I recognize that this has a pedestal in the fandom for a reason. This is about how Darth Bane joined the Sith, recognized the problems of the Sith, and created the Rule of Two. And I think it's just a brilliant book. If you've heard of the Thought Bomb, whoo, that is an interesting idea. All right. So that's the last series. I have 3 standalones. These standalones are kind of thematic based, and I think will be good entry points for you because if you've never read Star Wars and you're looking for a specific itch to scratch, these three books. So we'll start with, I just talked about the Old Republic and the kind of dark side stuff. Let's keep that theme going with Darth Plagueis by James Luceno. This is it's a prequel book because it takes place all the way up to about episode 1, but this is a book about Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious and how the Rule of Two develops from the Old Republic towards the prequel era, and you follow them as they gain power, and it's very much a dark side book. And so if you want to read about the dark side, you're reading about bad guy stuff. You're reading about dark side stuff in here, so be forewarned. But it's an excellent, first book. It's an excellent kind of standalone. If you're a big prequel era fan, there's tons of prequel era characters and connections in this book, but as I said, be forewarned, it's pretty dark. My next standalone I'll recommend is not quite as dark, and that is Shadows of the Empire. This was part of a huge multimedia campaign back in 1996, which included comics, it included a video game, it included the novel, it included a soundtrack. This story had it all, except a movie. And Shadows of the Empire by Steve Perry tells the story that takes place after Empire Strikes Back, before Return of the Jedi. So in that year period, you're reading about how Luke and Leia and Chewie are trying to go and rescue Han. And they have to accomplish some things before they can just go straight to Tatooine. And so you're reading about their journeys there. You're reading about Prince Shizor, who is the head of a crime syndicate, the Black, I think it's the Black Sun. You're reading about his crime syndicate. You're reading about Darth Vader and the Emperor and how imperial politics are playing out with Shizor. And so this book, it feels kind of that classic Star Wars feeling. It's an easy read. There's some weird scenes in here, but I mean, you're going to read weird scenes in a lot of books. But still, I think that this is a good entry point. And this book, I think, could jumpstart you into the post-Return of the Jedi universe, even though this isn't post-Return of the Jedi, because it kind of deals with the publishing in this similar way and some of the characters that show up in this or in other projects. So this book I would recommend. It's like the book between the movies type thing. The final recommendation I'll make for a good starting point is my favorite Star Wars book. And so I recommend it all the time, and everyone's like, Jonathan, stop recommending this book. But it's my favorite, and I think it's excellent. And that is Kenobi by John Jackson Miller. This is the book that takes place immediately after the events of Revenge of the Sith. It's about Obi-Wan's time on Tatooine. And most of the book is not from his perspective. And a lot of people, this turns them off to the book. But this is really cool because it's about the people on Tatooine reacting to Obi-Wan. They see him come to town. They see him interacting with them, and they're trying to figure out who he is and what's up with him. And it is a genius Star Wars Western. It is an has excellent prose, excellent themes. It has excellent pacing. It has excellent characters. It has excellent twists. There are multiple twists in this book that are just amazing. And this is probably the most accessible book on the list if you've never read Star Wars. There's no connections to anything, but yet you still get the feel for how to read a Star Wars book. This book has, for example, my English teacher, I think when I was in high school, she'd watched Star Wars with her husband because her husband was a fan, but she wasn't a reader. I got her to read this book and she loved it. So this is an easy entry-level type thing. This won't provide a lot of connections going forward, but this will get you into the mindset of being able to read the Star Wars books. And so it's an excellent book. This book won the Scribe Award, which is a tie-in fiction award. It was an excellent book. So I would recommend those 6 books and or series. Again, there's other starting places you could start with. And for people asking specifically about Return of the Jedi, because that is the big interconnected storyline, that would be Rogue Squadron and Heir to the Empire. But there could be others that you could start out with. Certainly, I'm not limiting it that this could only be the starting points. So let me know where you would suggest starting. Do you agree or disagree with my list? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.